All right, one of the chronic problems with these old MGs is that they only had one strut for both the trunk and the hood. And you can see almost every place where these, I'm seeing this on other videos as well, because the strut gets, it's not an automatic strut, you have to click it. People would always tweak it and the trunk would get bent. You can see this is, I've already taken the crease out of it, but it's still, the whole trunk has kind of a bend in it here. I have to straighten that out. You can see compared to the opposite side, which is straight and level. Granted, this is just sitting in there. It's not even on the hinges, but it's all tweaked. On the front end, I've got the same issue. This is where the strut connected on the front end, and I actually had to do some welding up in here to get this straightened out, but the metal was all bent and tweaked and stressed over the years. You can see again, I don't have this on the hinges, but you can see how stressed that metal was, and it actually creased right in there. So we're going to put a pair of hydraulic struts in. Here's the new set of hydraulic struts. These sit a little further back in a different place on the hood and on the trunk. And they're on both sides, so it evenly distributes the weight. And because they're hydraulic, as opposed to this, which used a latching mechanism that you had to manually disengage, and I think that's why a lot of people just pulled on the trunk, and if it wasn't disengaged, it would tweak the trunk. So we're going to phase this out and put in a bit more modern trunk struts, and we'll see how that comes out. So working on the fit to make sure that everything looks good, and the trunk is a little proud. I need to get this down. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take the trunk off, and I'm going to remove the actual hinges, and we're going to shim them so that the hinges themselves are a little further down. That should get this nice and flush. Okay, so I've whipped up some shims out of just some metal stock that I had. These are based on some previous project. I think these came out of a Mustang, and I don't know what these shims were for. I think they were for the seats. But in that project, we replaced the seats with late model seats. So I had these shims, and they seem really nice. The advantage using shims over washers are that you can loosen the bolt and then slide a shim out to adjust it, so you don't have to completely disassemble in order to change the dimensions for what you're shimming. So what we're going to do on this is we're going to line some shims up here on the bottom end, and then install it back where it goes, back up in here. And what that will do is, in effect, it'll change the geometry of the hinge. So instead of being up, it'll be a little bit lower, and that will pull the entire trunk lid back down into position. Oh, here's another good example for why to use shims instead of washers. So you see there's a fuel line that has a little holder, a little bracket on there, and it shares that same stud. So you have to run it through there first anyway. So what I did was I just ran a couple of threads into the holes. Now I can just throw some shims in there to make up that distance. If only I can hold the camera steady. You can see you just put the shims right in there, and then off you go. Should be able to fit two of them in there. There you go. There you just slid two of them in there with no problems. And I'll screw those down. I'm going to put two more shims on the other side, and then we'll be good. Okay, so little wrap up. See, we've got the hydraulic struts on. They went in fine with the instructions were a little vague on the placement for this one. So just FYI, you can see the mark I had to make right there. It tells you to match where this head is to where the distance for that head is. On mine it was 6 3/4 inches from this mark to here. I know it's kind of weird to measure off of the edge, but that was the only real reference point that I had. But it is kind of vague. Don't ignore the instructions about having a depth stopper on the end of your drill bit. That's critical. You don't want to poke a hole through the top of the hood. Machine screws go on the top, and the threaded screws go on the bottom. Also, make sure that you point this flange downward, not upward. Make sure that you're not using this area, otherwise the trunk won't close at all. Here you can see I've got the shims in there. They've reduced the height of the front of the trunk. Now when you close it, you can see, see if I can line up. It is dead flat. There is nothing sticking up at all. So it's a 1-to-1, that distance right there. So there you go. Hood and trunk adjustments and hydraulic struts for the 1977 MGB.